With world-class expertise and local insight, Dexus creates value, not just for today, but long into tomorrow.
From Barangaroo Studios, the AusBiz COB is the key stuff you need to know about the day in business and finance.
Welcome to the COB. Hello, I'm Nadine Blaney.
And I'm Juliette Sarley. Good to be with you on a day where we saw some optimism filtering through into the equity market.
We sure did, and I just had a look at European futures. DAX futures are up, FTSE futures are down, however, by about 0.1%. And looking at US futures, still positive, and that had an influence on our market to start this session. Let's take a look at how it all unfolded, Juliette.
Yeah, indeed. Let's have a quick look at where the CBO 200 is tracking as I pull up the ASX 200 for you. It is firmer by 1/3%, 22 points, 8173 heading into the close. So a similar gain coming through on the CBO 200. And you can really see, I guess, some of that optimism around the 11 a.m. Session. Then, of course, later into the trade, as you mentioned, on the US and European futures. But as we started to hear news that perhaps there will be somewhat of an impasse, is that the right word, between the US and China in terms of these trade talks?
Well, we'll see. I mean, it certainly seems as if they're moving closer. I think it was also worthwhile noting that we did have the reserve requirement ratio cut coming through in China, as well as the rate cut in general. It was about a 10 basis point, then a 50 basis point for the RRR. So Chinese officials, the central bank officials, saying that, that they will do whatever they can to protect the financial stability of China and that there's so much global uncertainty. So just an acknowledgement that they are on the case. Everything is sort of a moving feast right now, as always in markets, but it's been really interesting to see how the ASX has been holding up. I had a technical special on the call today, so Thomas Atkinson from FX Evolution was quite constructive on where the market is sitting right now and where it could potentially head.
And I meant breakthrough, the opposite of impasse. Let's have a look at the three themes. Thanks for not pulling me up on it. I did see your eyes go, Tariff talks very much the focus of the day today on a potential breakthrough. China, that was the other thing that happened around 11-ish, where we had the PBOC announcing that they are going to cut that triple R ratio, that reserve requirement ratio, and of course one of their other policy tools as well, by around 10 basis points.
And that's good for us if we get stimulus coming through in China. We've been waiting and watching for that announcement. And we are also, again, keeping our eye on oil this time because we've seen a big increase in the price of oil.
Yeah, absolutely, up some 3% on the Brent contract overnight. So let's have a look at how our energy stocks fared today in the Australian session. In fact, we're going to start with healthcare. CSL down 2.5%.
Why not?
Why not? Cochlear off by about 0.7% there.
Yep. So we're watching oil, eyeing those US-China trade talks, also lower oil output. I feel like we're in for surprises all around today. There we go. There's Woodside up by 1.8%. So quite a turnaround from what we saw previously. Centos up by 2.5%. And I'm being a bit facetious, but all I can say, it doesn't matter whether the oil price goes up or down in the broader world. It seems like we always pay the same at the Bowser here in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. It costs a lot. All right, banks, of course, we heard from NAB today. Shares up by almost 2%. CBA, well, look, pretty flat there. Westpac still being coming under pressure, I should say. But of course, NAB really beating expectations despite that small decline in its underlying net interest margin.
What I find interesting as well today is that we haven't seen a lot of reaction to the escalation that's happening between India and Pakistan. We're just hearing from the Pakistan Foreign Ministry saying that it's convinced that India's blatant attack of aggression, it says, constitutes a clear violation of Pakistan's sovereignty. Obviously, it's not escalated and hopefully will not. But we are talking about two nuclear equipped powers there. So yeah, we'll see how markets react to this one going forward.
All right, getting back to stock specific locally, we mentioned NAB reporting this 1% jump in half yearly cash profit to just under $3.6 billion.
Yeah, Liontown looking good today, up close to 7%. It's joining the lithium industry support program in WA.
Horizon looking to cut around 200 full-time jobs across its business. Nuix
absolutely getting smashed after it withdrew its full year guidance. Really interesting because a couple of weeks ago it flagged some trouble and related it to tariffs. And I know one market participant was kind of scratching his head over that one. But Newegg saying that corporates are just holding off on some of those big IT decisions.
Platinum Asset down about 5%, 59 cents. It extended its decline in funds under management.
ASIC has pulled up Macquarie for, quote, ineffective supervision of its trading desk.
We're, of course, at the so-called confession season hosted by Macquarie as well. We heard from Nine Entertainment. They're expecting further cost cuts of 10 to 20 million throughout the full year. Of course, they flagged in February something like $100 million in cost cutting by the end of full year 27.
Yeah, Empor launching a cost-cutting plan as well to reach $50 million in savings through tech innovation. They're talking about these self-serve fueling stations, so smaller, more nimble, but you've got to do it all yourself.
And you know, our friends at 10Cap, they like Zip. I was talking to Jason Todd around 11 when Zip was up 6%. It closed higher by 12%, also after it reaffirmed its full year 25 guidance for cash earnings of at least $153 million.
Yeah, best performer on the 200 as the last of the day's trades go through. And we'll be catching up with June Bailu from 10Cap on Friday morning to get her overall assessment of this Macquarie Confession Conference. She's there, and will be interesting to get her reflections, because she always gives us a bit of color, Jules, of what people were talking about on the sidelines as
I love
well.
That.
Separate from Macquarie Conference, though, we did hear from a couple of retailers.
Yeah, JB Hi-Fi, 6.5% sales in third quarter total Australia sales growth. That was quite well below what the New Zealand sales growth was, and shares down about 0.5%. Temple & Webster, though, that was really interesting. The CEO saying that the US-China tariff trade war has been to date a net positive for the business because they're seeing forward inbound shipping rates down about 20%, and talking about some of these deflationary pressures too.
Yeah, really interesting to see how that pans out. I heard you talking about a personal anecdote today about,
Very interesting. I should tell Mark Gardner and our listeners my very interesting story. So just to give you a little insight into how exciting my life is, I was looking for a paper shredder, and when I went to buy it, it was
we are coming into tax season. So
yes. So when I went to buy it, $70 on Amazon, the shipping cost was taking it to over $200 to send it to me. So of course I flipped out of that app. I went into a Chinese app. I bought that and a whole bunch of other stuff I don't need, and it's being sent to me for $90, all of it together.
Yeah, I mean, that's the Temu trap, isn't it? You go on there to buy one thing
said
and
it,
no, I'm constantly fending my kids off. They want to buy one thing, and then all of a sudden we've got 20 things in the basket. But it's getting cheaper and cheaper. So yeah, there is obviously for the first time ever, we're sort of getting the good end of the deal here, because obviously China's going to push that excess inventory to other countries. So yeah, look, I mean, the trade deal last night, I think the market's being a little bit overly optimistic. I think Bessent and some Chinese officials being in the same country at the same time for other meetings probably doesn't constitute trade deal. But look, we'll see what happens. I think the Nasdaq's sort of given back about half of what it gained directly after the open, but it seems to be whacking on that sort of the Nasdaq around that 20,300. So
just on the retail story that came to the fore today, I mean, Temple & Webster, I mean, a sexier kind of growth company, I suppose, but JB Hi-Fi has just been that stellar overperformer for quite some time. Was today any type of a buying opportunity for JB Hi-Fi, or would it have to be a lot lower for you?
A lot lower for me at the moment. I think those stocks have got a pretty insane premium in them, Wesfarmers particularly. Many of them well in excess of the valuations of even most of the Mag 7 now, which I think are probably, the AI thematic's probably a fair bit stronger than a growth thematic than, say, retail. But I mean, they were down a lot more earlier in the day. But I think it's not the company's fault. I think the results were really solid. I just think it's very hard to justify these forward PEs and valuations with the current growth rate, basically. So you've got like Wesfarmers, JB Hi-Fi, even Coles at really high valuations, even compared to their 5-year average to themselves, let alone the rest of the sector. So, they've probably done well to finish fairly unchanged. Temple & Webster, if I was going to own a retailer, that'd probably be very high on my list, because I think it'll actually get the growth to justify the higher valuation. But look, we don't have any retailers on at the moment, but we'll be looking to, excuse the pun, go shopping if the market goes lower.
Love it. Boom tish. Zip up 12% today. You in that?
No, don't really play too much in zip. Buy now, pay later at the moment, it's just not really. Look, a great trading stock, but yeah, it's not really our style as it stands at the moment. Client demand's more around the more conservative, high conviction names. So yeah, I think the best trade I did in zip was a couple of years ago, not buying it on the way down or convincing people not to buy it on the way down. But yeah, I think it's actually Block got hit last week. They're pretty similar valuations, and they both look pretty cheap at the moment.
Magellan's having a good day today. Its price target lifted 4% by UBS to $9.20. It updated on funds under management yesterday, so still seeing outflows of $1 billion in April, retail outflows of $100 million, net insto outflows of $900 million. I wonder why, would you be buying Magellan around these levels?
They couldn't pay me to touch the old school fund managers at the moment. I think the whole industry's changed. That model is just not really that relevant anymore. The ETFs are killing them, but these new wave like Pinnacle and GQG partners, that new model's just better. And unless they're willing to change, I think that it's always a popularity contest in those in that funds management space, and I really can't see why I would be going for the new leaders or the new popular kids in town in the funds management space, because they always attract the inflows. It's just been a steady and slow decline for a lot of those old school traditional fund managers, and I don't see it stopping, to be honest. You just really do need to be in the popular fund manager that's seeing all the inflows.
Hanging out with the cool kids.
Hanging out with the cool kids.
Kind of like what you're doing here right now.
Absolutely.
CSL.
The people that buy paper shredders on the weekend. The healthcare sector, the CSL drop of 2% today, is that just, risk off because the defensive aspect, we don't need to be in healthcare today, or is it something broader?
No, there was a mention of more tariffs on healthcare. There's just a little bit of uncertainty at the moment. I suppose it's, I think it got back up to nearly 250, 260 sort of area. I guess, people may be going to a little bit more risk on because there's potential talks or whatever, but we're definitely on the sell side here at the moment. We're sort of taking a bit of profits from what we bought, in the panic in April and returning to a bit of cash. Feel like we may have missed a buying opportunity in the gold miners. It bounced a little bit sooner than we thought.
What does Jonathan think about that?
Well, that's Jonathan's fault. I'm just going to have to squarely blame him for that one. We weren't aggressive enough, but yeah, look, I think gold at that 3,400 prices just continues to mean that those miners will print money. So
now we don't have to go into all the detail about NAB, but clearly, if the market is a voting machine, Westpac was treated very harshly yesterday. Today, we've got NAB up by 2%. While the other banks, I've got to say, CBA and Westpac still in negative territory.
Yes, CBA just random what it does on any given day. I think if you look at those other three of the big four, NAB's kind of normalising. I think it was the most harshly dealt with and had its poorer result last update. So I think it's just sort of returning to normal. But yeah, and I kind of like there's some fighting words from the CEO today, and sticking up for his company and saying and that they're underrated, etc. And there's a lot of initiatives. So it's nice to get a little bit of colour from the bank CEOs. It's not all about capital ratios, etc.
And I just wanted to ask you one quick question on what we heard from China, because you made a really interesting comment before we came on air about, just because the leaders or Scott Bessent and China might be meeting in Europe, does that necessarily lead to any kind of...
Well, I would have thought Trump would want to be the focal point of announcing that deal. I found it really odd that Scott Bessent was the one that came out with it, which made me a touch suspicious, to be honest. And they are in Switzerland, in Geneva, for different reasons. So whether it's just coincidence and then just not correcting people or whatever, but obviously I think that stimulus that came out of China today, I think that's going to be a really long-term positive for the resources sector, because if we get a trade deal, it'll really kick things along, and China obviously has provided stimulus. And if we don't get a trade deal, I mean, the downside's already there, really. In most of those resource stocks, they're trading at really low valuations. So I think that sector of the market might show probably rally in the back half of the year, but they're trying to. I mean, how jealous would Donald Trump be having? They've got a central bank that's actually cutting rates, and he's about to more than likely be told that they're not cutting rates in the States tonight with the Fed meeting. So there was some open market activity from the Fed, 20 billion in the short end, which will probably, adding some liquidity, which will probably mean that even further seals the fact that they're not going to be looking at any rate cuts soon. So they're doing it via that open market, flow there.
Yeah. You brought up a good point. We're waiting for FOMC. It's already Wednesday, Thursday tomorrow. Crazy. Mark Gardner, MPC Markets. Always a pleasure. Thank you. Now, we got Mark's fundamental view of Temple & Webster and JB Hi-Fi, but as I said, it was a technical special of the call today. Our guests were
Michael Gable.
Yeah, Michael Gable from Fairmont Equities and Thomas Atkinson from FX Evolution.
What's interesting about both these companies is that up until today, they were pretty much touching all-time highs or very close to all-time highs. So, in the case of JB Hi-Fi, maybe their numbers are a little bit less than expected. Temple & Webster came out with, good set of numbers, margins at the top end of guidance. So, ultimately at the end of the day, stocks which are in an uptrend and despite everything that's happened in the past month being near all-time highs is a positive. So I think, broadly speaking, those two would be stocks that you'd look to buy on a dip.
Realistically, at $92-ish, that area there that I've got highlighted is the most traded zone. So this represents on the way up, JB Hi-Fi has traded the most at that exact price. And we often find that when markets start to cool off a little bit after an earnings, after that hype's kind of died out, that we see markets pull back to those zones. So at least for me, I think on JB Hi-Fi, I'd be looking at around the $92 area, at least to see a reaction.
And check that out online or listen to it in podcast form if you like podcasts. Hopefully you do, because they really had a great conversation about 12 stocks today.
And we were talking in the newsroom, weren't we, about how much we love both those gentlemen's charts. They're just really simple, easy, clear to read. All right, let's have a look at the market leaders. Kelsian Group finishing higher by around 18%. Interesting.
I've got Zip, Boss, Polynovo, Deep Yellow, and Temple & Webster, followed by Magellan. But these guys did well as well. Kelsian Group also did present at the Macquarie conference today, up by 18%.
Yes, and you're right. In terms of the top 200, Zip was the front runner, up 12.8%. Boss Energy up by 11.5%. Let's look at some of the laggards in the session.
Nuix, yep, I got that. Linus as well. Bapcor, no news except for that withdrawal of guidance coming from Nuix that I could see. Telix Pharmaceuticals as well. Northern Star off by 3%. It had production issues today. It saw its target price lifted actually by Goldman Sachs to $22.30. So if you believe that, there is still a bit of upside to come for Northern Star.
All right, in the small end of town, Dateline Resources having a good session, up 25%. The likes of Tivan, Gorilla Gold Mines, which I know that is one, speaking of gold stocks that MPCs are interested in, Jonathan has spoken about a few times, 14% higher at 57 cents.
Flip the page and let's see what we've got there in the small to mid cap space. E-Road getting hammered off by 16%. Duratec as well, down by 7% to $1.56.
And of course tonight, well, the FOMC decision, but we've also got EU retail sales coming through. And then when you look at earnings, some really interesting ones. We've got DoorDash, also Uber and Disney.
I was watching something yesterday talking about the thousands and thousands of dollars it takes to go visit, Magic Kingdom right now. But
oh gosh, imagine if you had loads of kids that you had to take there.
I think it's more for adults, but anyways.
Oh, okay. Well,
tomorrow we get A and Z results.
Light
and Wonder.
We're speaking to the Orica CEO as well. We're going to bring you that interview in the 3 o'clock show tomorrow afternoon. And Westpac trading ex-dividend. Let's see where the local market has finished the session. A gain of around 1/3% there on the COB 200. Similar move coming through on the ASX 200. So of course optimism about potential trade breakthrough between China and the US, also China giving more stimulus, of course, to its economy, or giving a boost to the overall sentiment, and from what we heard at the Macquarie Investment Conference.
Look, I hate to be a Debbie Downer to end it, but these India strikes on Pakistan over those tourist killings, Pakistan is saying that Indian jets have been downed. Russia weighing in, saying that it's deeply concerned by the India-Pakistan confrontation, calling for restraint. And the US President Donald Trump calling the India-Pakistan tension a shame. Rubio, the Secretary of State, has been speaking with both sides. Look, I'm just saying it's a watching brief when it comes to geopolitics.
Yeah, we're going to obviously continue to monitor that, and always tough news to talk about as well. But we will be back from 9:45 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. We'll see you then with the Fed decision.
Yeah, have a great night.